Welcome everyone to our segment 1 classes. This month we are going to look at Neptune square, the nodal axis. As Leroy has said, we are doing I think 11-part series, adding Chiron into it. So this month we have Neptune, next month we have Pluto, then we'll take a little bit of a summer break and start up with a new series in the fall. First of all, our housekeeping slide that you can see on your screen. Segment 1 Associates, many of you are familiar with the different offerings we have on our website, so we're going to jump right into materials. First of all, a basic understanding from the perspective of evolutionary astrology. It's based upon observation, correlation, and it also understands that we have 12 main archetypes. And so for EA, the planet and the sign and house that it rules is considered one archetype. And the example you have on your screen is Mars ruling Aries. Mars also rules the first house. Mars, Aries, first house, same archetypal principles. Another example is Mercury ruling Gemini and third house, same principles. And so Jeffrey Green always used to say that if you would just start with understanding the 12 archetypes, then you can extrapolate those 12 archetypes out to a planet, a sign, or a house. Leroy, you might want to mute yourself, honey, if you haven't, because I can hear a little background noise from you.
I'm sorry, thanks.
Yeah, no worries. So let's move right into this archetype of Neptune, which is the ruler of Pisces in the 12th house. We also can look at those 12 archetypes being broken down into the 2 polarities, the 3 modalities, and the 4 elements. So Neptune, Pisces in the 12th house is passive polarity, energy moving back to the center, mutable modality, mutating, adapting, trying to put it all together. And of course, the element of water, water is the emotions. So one of the most basic principles of Neptune is that it is the principle of the collective consciousness, unconsciousness. Yes, we can think of this from the perspective of humans, but we can extrapolate this last of the 12 archetypes out to include all species. So it's the totality of consciousness for all species, 2-legged, 4-legged, flora, fauna, however you want to look at it. You can make it be Gaia as a living heartbeat with planet Earth. It is also the totality of unconsciousness for all species. When something recedes from our current focus and goes into subconscious unconsciousness, it's still there. It's still information that we can draw back up into consciousness. Now, what happens with this collective conscious unconsciousness is that the perspectives change over time. You know, there's a gazillion examples that are out there. In Jeffrey's teachings back in the day when he taught, he was drafted into the Vietnam War, and during the time period that the war was taking place, the collective consciousness was for the war. And you were a draft dodger and ridiculed if you were a conscientious objector. Now, as we look at this over a period of time, 40 years later or 40 plus years later, many of us have a collective perspective that that war was a waste of time. It, was the first of many wars that could be called a waste of time or never-ending wars. Anyway, there's many examples in which we can look at how collective perspectives on something will change over time. Now, as we've said many times from the perspective of evolutionary astrology as well, Pisces in the 12th house are the last of the 12 archetypes. And so Neptune, 12th house, and Pisces are a composite of all 11 archetypes that came before. Contrast this with Mars ruling Aries in the first house, and in the first archetype of the zodiac, baby of the zodiac, me, 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 me. Initiation, instinctively acting upon conscious desires. So as we move through that zodiac and we get to the end of the wheel, it's like we are opening our arms as large as we can. And so the 12th archetype contains all that came before. So Neptune, 12th house in Pisces, can describe the totality of life and reality as it exists on planet Earth and as it exists in other planes of existence as well. And this is why, when it comes to the archetype of Neptune, 12th house in Pisces, you really, really have to do and observe and correlate, because it can go anywhere. It can have all kinds of different expressions or tangents in how that archetype is actually operating for any specific person relative to their chart. Now, Neptune is also the principle of transcendence. And this is where we're going to align ourselves with some type of transcendental or beyond a physical belief system in order to realize the unity or connectiveness in all creation. So what we do is we move beyond, or we transcend, that physical space-time reality. And it's also about learning how to transcend beyond culturally based values or the values of a society or a country, and move into universal, timeless values based upon what many times EA will call natural law, or timeless, universal spiritual principles that have always existed and always will. And what this principle of transcendence then allows is for us to recognize the spiritualization in all aspects of life. So wherever you find Neptune in your chart, wherever you find the sign Pisces, whatever is in your 12th house, whether there are planets there or no planets, there's a sign on the cusp of the 12th house. Maybe there's a sign intercepted. Wherever you find Neptune, Pisces in the 12th house, that is going to describe in total how you are working to spiritualize yourself, how you are working to know source energy, great spirit, God, goddess, whatever your languaging is. And of course, the spiritualization process of transcending this physical space-time world, yes, it will be relative to the evolutionary state of consciousness. If you are in consensus consciousness, then you may find yourself searching through and aligning with more human-made religions to whatever locality of the world you may be residing in. If you are individuating consciousness within your soul, you will want an individualized belief system, and this can include no belief system or atheism. And then, of course, as you are moving into the spirituated states of consciousness, you really are wanting to expand beyond the human-made religions. You want to understand one of those timeless belief systems that can explain the totality of consciousness. So remember, Neptune, Pisces in 12th house, and that transcendence or spiritualization process will still be relative. to the evolutionary state of consciousness within any soul. It is the principle of immortality from the soul's perspective. We move beyond the Saturn, Capricorn, 10th house, space-time reality and nationalism of cultures to being beyond time. That's Neptune's whole thing, is to step outside the boundaries of space-time and to move into what is timeless, what is infinite. And when we look at ourselves from the perspective of our soul, the soul is that immutable consciousness that exists from life to life to life to life. The soul is immortal. And this is what's contained through that Neptune archetype then, is recognizing this immortal perspective of our individual soul and from the perspective of universal soul as well. Now, as we come into this physical body and pick up an existence, we become security-based. This is my body. It contains my soul. It contains my blood. It contains, this part of me. I exist. I am. And so Neptune, Pisces, 12th house is the principle of dissolving any barriers that prevent us from merging with universal source. Now, those barriers can be all four elements. They can literally be physical, but they can also be emotional, mental, and spiritual barriers. Even when we're working into spirituated states of consciousness, it still takes a lot of courage to be able to let go and let God guide us. And we can have resistance towards it. And until we've merged and come through the other end and recognize that I still am me in my merging with source, we don't, it can be hard to let go of that resistance and that sense of me, I am. However, Neptune, Pisces in the 12th house is relentless. And all of us, each and every lifetime, go through a merging of our individual power or our individual soul with the cosmic whole, so that we can then understand and experience and realize the ultimate source of power, which is universal source. Now, of course, the ultimate barrier to dissolve is that physical body. It is the death of that body and the soul then merging back into its non-physical form and working through lessons in that non-physical form of merging with source until we choose to incarnate again. So this Neptune archetype is the principle of dissolving the separating desires, because those barriers that keep us separate from or alienated from source are all of our separating desires. Now, we'll revisit this one next month with Pluto ruling the soul, square the nodes. You've probably, if you've been studying evolutionary astrology, have recognized that Pluto and the soul has a dual desire nature. Separating desires, returning desire. Separating desires, anything you can think of. A new lover, a new job, a new car, a new purse. Returning desire, to know that which created us. Now, the process of dissolving these separating desires, it is a natural exhaustion of the separating desires. So we can move through having a lover, a job, a car, as we're dissolving these desires. What we have to watch out for is the distortion of clinging to those separating desires because of the sense of security it gives us. And so if we're resisting the merging with source, if we're clinging to any separating desire, then what we will move into with Neptune is what we call those cycles of confusion. Things will lose meaning. It'll lose their sense of value and meaning. We can go through alienation, disorientation, disintegration, depression. Again, that cycle of confusion is where everything just loses its sense of meaning, and we cannot make sense of anything anymore. Now, each individual soul is going to have varying degrees of resistance to surrendering and dissolving our barriers or separating desires, and we'll have varying degrees of resisting the merging process, from complete and utter resistance in every way to just little itty bitty areas where we may resist. Whatever the degree of resistance, it is going to be based upon an unconscious fear of losing control of our life in some way. So we will cling to whatever we've manifested up to this point in regards to the separating desires, because that manifestation that I am, I exist, I have a body, it gives us some sense of control over our life. And as I just said, until we have merged with Source in some degree, whatever our next step is, and have come out the other side of the merging and recognize we're not losing control, we're gaining a sense of understanding. We're gaining that connection. We're gaining in the co-creative process with Universal Source. So as we all go through those cyclic time periods where we enter the confusion and disintegration through Neptune, Pisces, 12th house, what will happen in that cycle of confusion is it will not immediately be replaced. Whatever was just dissolved. We're left in a void, that void of existence. And the reason for this is we would just immediately replace it with another separating desire, or we would go back to the past to whatever we just dissolved and recreate it again. So Source deliberately leaves us in this void so that we cannot substitute anything for Source. Now, in the broad scheme of things, and as we go through countless lifetimes and expanding in consciousness from consensus individuating to spirituating, yes, whatever comes along and replaces in the void can be another separating desire. But there, as we expand in consciousness, there becomes a change in perspective. That separating desire or that manifestation of something doesn't become a substitute for Source. The perspective changes where we recognize that, for instance, going through an intimate relationship with someone can be part of that spiritualization process of returning to Source. We don't worship the money becomes a tool on our spiritualization path that maybe allows us a little more time to meditate or ponder or go on a spiritual pilgrimage. Or maybe we've simplified our values and we have more time for spiritual work. The details can be as varied and endless as there are souls on planet Earth. So Neptune, Pisces 12th house, is the principle of acknowledging and implementing. Literally just gets dissolved away from our life after we go through the void. Sooner or later, things seem to magically turn around. Full of clarity. Okay, all right. Sorry about that. It said my connection was lost and now it's back again. So hopefully we didn't miss out on too many words. I got my voice back to myself for a moment there. And so the cycles of clarity, when, we find deeper value and meaning, I literally use those words with, for instance, in the consensus in individuated states of consciousness. Sometimes to just say, well, you need to find source. They're going to look at you, and especially with Neptune square the nodes. Well, what's that mean? How do I do that? And so sometimes I will simplify the language to just say, what gives you value in life? What gives you meaning in life? And just that process of going, what is the most important thing to me? I have a nephew who has Neptune square the nodes, and he dips in and out of spiritually searching. For me, he's, individuated state. Sometimes I think he's first individuated. Sometimes I think he's third individuated. I go back and forth with him. But what gives him the deepest value and meanings in his life is his child. And so, how do you then create a life that makes sense through honoring and valuing a relationship with your daughter? So these cycles of clarity, again, it's not that there is an absence of separating desires. There's a gradual shifting to the separating desires become the tools of exhausting separation and the tools of going, what's this all mean? What's the larger picture here? What really makes sense for me in my life? Now, when we have those magical shifts, or all of a sudden, one moment, one day, all right, life makes sense again. What's really going on the deeper levels is we're being inspired by divine sources and some type of connection to a larger whole in the universe. Now, this is true whether we're first spirituated and we really recognize, oh, you didn't abandon me, source. You've been there all the time. I just didn't see the connection. Or we're, working with somebody who is consensus or individuated. Somehow, some way, it is coming from relationship to the divine. We don't always recognize it, though, in consensus or individuated states of consciousness. What also is happening here on the cycle of clarity side is it is teaching all souls to experience ourself as the individualized wave upon the sea. And so the wave comes up and it crests, but it still comes back to the sea. So it's a long process over however many lifetimes it takes to really be able to recognize we manifest, we return to the unmanifest. We manifest and incarnate, return to the unmanifest. We are working our way back to source through the process of life, through incarnations, through the separating desires. There contrasts this with some of your human-made religions who, you know, want to have a denial or suppression of desires and pray ourselves perfect. Then I like to say, well, if we could pray ourselves perfect, why can't we snap our fingers and have instant nirvana? I don't want to come back again. Well, guess what? You're coming back again. And so it has to move through these experiences here in the manifested world. It's the, how do you know the light if you don't sense the dark? It's through the contrast that we're learning. So as we go through these cycles of confusion, followed by cycles of clarity, and back and forth and back and forth, it's teaching us the principle of merging our ego with our own individual soul. It's not killing the ego. It's not suppressing the ego. It's ego serving soul. And then it's also teaching us to merge our individual soul with universal soul. And so it's finding the courage to move forward into the unknown, or what Jeffrey Green would call the abyss of infinity, not knowing where we're going, but sensing that the past doesn't work again. And we have free choice. So we can remain stuck in the past. We can remain paralyzed in the present moment. If we do that, sooner or later, though, that disintegration will get stronger and stronger and stronger until life is utterly meaningless. And we somehow have to take that leap forward into the unknown. And so those cycles of dissolving or confusion leading to cycles of clarity, plunging into the abyss, being afraid to, and stepping out of it or refusing to do it. The thing to understand is these two cycles, confusion and clarity, are not controlled by our individual ego. They're not even controlled by our individual soul. These cycles occur in and of themselves, divined by a higher power. It is Source helping us shed, separating desires and manifestations until we are really asking, why am I here? What's it all about? I want to know that from which I came. It is also the principle of faith and trust in a higher power. And that's what that ability to let go of the past, let go of the paralyzation or being poised on that precipice. Do I go forward or backward? That ability to just go forward into the abyss or the unknown teaches us that lesson of faith. Teaches us to trust Source, to trust in the higher power. And it teaches us to move forward in evolution in through energy first, with manifestation second. So that fear of our individual disillusionment or disillusion, the fear of surrendering to higher power than ourself, it is just the delusion of the separating desires that are reflected through our ego and our soul. Interesting one to ponder, isn't it? Neptune, Pisces in the 12th house, because they are the unmanifest or non-physical or metaphysical, also contains the principle of our dream world. How many of us can go without sleep in our physical body? You can try it for a while, but if you manage to do it for several days, eventually lose all sense of consciousness and you can go crazy. And so that need to sleep is where the soul can reflect upon everything that happens in the physical body. So we go to sleep and we lose consciousness for the most part. However, the soul doesn't lose consciousness. The soul is still operating. We're still connected soul to body via that silver cord, as they call it, in the base of the medulla oblongata, I think it is, the base of the head. Okay, that's where primary consciousness comes through right there. However, we enter into the dream world, and basically the dreams follow a lunar cycle, month to month, and you can track them new moon to new moon, full moon to full moon. You can track it from your natal moon and on a lunar cycle, however you want to track it as well. You can do. But these dreams then fall into three different kinds. The most common dream is junk dreams. And this is where we are just processing through and clearing out everything we are bombarded with in our busy body world today. How many times do you watch a movie or catch some tidbit on news, or overhear a conversation between two family members or your parents if you're a teenager, and something triggers you, and so you dream about it? Then it's your soul processing through it, making sense of it, and releasing excess thought. We will also have what are called past life dreams. And probably the way to most basically understand them, Jeffrey Green would always say that those dreams have a tendency to appear black and white, and they're like a long, long tunnel that you got to come out of when you're waking up. But that's not always the case, because there are some people that dream in technicolor even when they have past life dreams. Probably the most basic principle is that when you do wake up, you're extremely disorientated. You don't know where you are. You were in that past life. And so it takes a moment to just really go, oh, okay, I'm in this lifetime. I'm in this body. This is my job. This is my relationship. This is whatever my circumstances are. So it's that disorientation upon waking and really needing, several moments of time to come back into your body and recognize the current life. Doesn't mean you are not reflecting. You can definitely reflect upon the past life dreams. And then the third kind of dream is what we call superconscious dreams. And this is where we can leave the solar system. We can travel the galaxy. We can travel to other galaxies. We can travel to other planets, other star systems. We can also, though, receive messages from other sources. We can receive messages from our guides or angels. We can receive messages from, more evolved souls who are not in physical form. And we can even get to the point, as a side note, where we can even channel those other sources through us in our waking moments, if we have a very, a strong Neptune Pisces 12th house archetype. If you know someone who is a psychic, someone who is a channeler, one of the first places you look to is planets in the 12th house or Pisces, or a lot of aspects to the planet Neptune. And it's not always a guarantee. I'm not a channeler, and I have Sun, Mercury, Neptune from 1 to 2 degrees Scorpio. My Neptune is only half a degree away from Mercury. That's that. I don't feel myself as a channeler. I don't channel others. I think I just channel divine thought, as I like to say it. So there's, variety of ways in which this can come through, from being a psychic to even channeling other sources. Now, Neptune Pisces in the 12th house is also the principle of judgment. And this is where we will judge our actions based upon standards of right, wrong conduct. And here is where we have really become distorted in our human consciousness, because we are so conditioned to human standards of right, wrong conduct versus those universal standards or timeless natural law standards. All you have to do is look at the rigidity of the Middle East in regards to its conduct of women. And, what's happening this summer, an extreme dictatorship country, Saudi Arabia, has finally given women the right to drive a car. And yet, they still want them to wear the burqa or whatever it is, where you cover yourself from head to toe and all you see is the slit of the eyes. Here in, the US, you can just see the extremes in the standards of right, wrong conduct that's going on between liberal and conservative perspectives in the United States. And so as we are expanding through those cycles of confusion and clarity and trying to find broader and broader value and meaning and no source, we expand those standards of right, wrong conduct beyond human-made or culturally based into what we call universal. And one of the most basic things we want to look at then in regards to this principle of judgment is judging the intent of the soul involved versus the outcome, because this is an imperfect world. Perfection doesn't exist here. Neptune, Pisces, 12th house in the polarity Virgo, 6th house in Mercury. We learn that this is the process to perfect here. And so if someone had the most, sincere intent to be helpful to someone else, you cannot judge it if their effort is rejected by the person they want to help. You can't then just say, well, because that person rejected them, bad. No. And, I like to say with this principle of judgment, judge less, discern more. How do you know the intent that was in the, consciousness of another soul with what they were trying to do? Now, included in this, I also I love this cliche: your freedom ends at my nose. My freedom ends at your nose. So when we fall into the distortions of, physically hurting someone, being physically cruel to someone, that's a manifestation that we can judge and go, you don't have a right to abuse another soul physically. We can include emotionally, mentally. If you, see someone who is just, a screaming rageaholic, chewing out another person or a child in public, I really sometimes have to bite my tongue when I'm out in a public place, say buying groceries or shopping, and a parent is just berating a child in front of everybody. It takes everything I've got to just silently say a prayer and send the child love, send the parent love too. That's a little bit easy, or a little bit harder to do for me sometimes. But, you know, again, showing you the different examples of judging less, discerning more, and really pondering what was the inner intent rather than what is the manifestation of a specific situation. So that intention and resolve to become more perfect or to self-improve is the ultimate standard upon which to judge ourselves, judge others, or even judge what we perceive to be source. Now, Neptune is also the principle of altered states of consciousness. And again, this is going to reflect that ultimate desire to merge with source. In body, releasing the body and letting it go. And so what happens is the Neptune Pisces 12th house archetype can create a lot of sensitivity to substances. I mean, it's as simple as you can eat one type of food, but you can't eat another type of food. And you have to do trial and error here and, you know, proceed with caution. One person can have 3 glasses of wine and feel fine. Another person can have a half a glass of wine and feel totally out of it because they're so sensitive to some, you know, the substance of alcohol. And so Neptune rules the pineal gland. And the pineal gland is what secretes melatonin. And that induces that sense of transcendence, of being beyond our physical body. And melatonin is also the substance that allows us to go to sleep. And so sometimes as we get older, and you know, for women, I've noticed this myself as I've been postmenopausal almost 15 years now. I don't fall asleep as easily as I used to. Mercury, Virgo, 6th house polarity. My mind sometimes doesn't shut down. I am processing before I even get to the dream world. And so as we sometimes are older, you know, some of us might choose to take melatonin as a supplement before going to sleep. Now, if that's something that you do, melatonin, if you take it in a powdered capsule or even a tablet, it takes anywhere from 2 to 3 hours to have an effect in the physical body. So if you need to sleep, sometimes it's going to be an herb like valerian root, or chamomile, or passion flower herb. Passion flower herb is an herb that calms down the mind to go to sleep. Valerian root is an herb that actually helps you to fall asleep. Here's another one for you. If you take the herb valerian root, or you take a blend that will have chamomile or other things in it, your basic valerian root capsule only works about 4 hours. And so I'll tell people, if you wake up in the middle of the night, you take another capsule. I have a sister who has a 12th house Pluto. Very sensitive to substances and has a lot of sleep issues, has her whole life. And so she'll take, you know, sleeping herbal combo and melatonin when she goes to sleep. And if she wakes up in the middle of the night, she will take another sleeping herb combo to move through the next 4 hours and get that 7-8 hours of rest. So what we're getting here finally is that the Neptune 12th house Pisces archetypes also include the principle of balance, when to be active and when to rest. And this can be day and night, when to be active in doing a job, Virgo polarity, when to go to sleep and rest the body and allow the soul to move along. But it can just be, you know, sometimes if a very active Neptune clinging to the separating desires, they can just be busybodies. They can activate that Virgo 6th house polarity and just be busy, 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 busy until they exhaust themselves and then rest. And so our consciousness, unconsciousness will be more balanced when we balance activity and rest on an individual soul level. So sometimes it's not just necessarily sleep. It can be meditation. It can be Tai Chi. It can be going to the gym or, you know, doing some physical activity to allow the body to rest. There's, you know, many different ways in which we can balance those principles of activity and rest. All right, those are my slides for the Neptune archetype. If there's something that you feel that I have missed or you have questions about, by all means, type into the Q&A panel for Leroy or raise your hand and mute you to speak up. I'm going to take a drink of water and then we're going to move on into our nodal axis material that we cover every month with this series. And so, a little nodal axis astronomy, north node, south node, they're points in space where the moon's path intercepts the plane of the ecliptic. And the ecliptic is the Earth's actual path around the sun, although from here on Earth it appears the opposite. North node ascending node is where the moon's path crosses above ecliptic. South node descending node where the moon's path crosses below the ecliptic. Here's a visual for you. Here's the moon's path as you see, and here's the point where it crosses south of the ecliptic. This is south node. 2 weeks later, the moon will pass north of the ecliptic. This is the point of the north node. And of course, you know, the moon and sun's paths are not always lined up. They do twice a year and we get eclipses, but they will have a separation between the ecliptic and the moon. And when you get to the longest point of separation, that's where you also have those planets square the nodes, as you can see here on your screen. Now, the nodal axis revolves backwards around the zodiac. It precesses. This signifies a return to universal source on a solar lunar level. Nodal axis is retrograde 90% of the time, direct 10%. That 9 out of 10 people born with the nodes retrograde will feel a stronger sense of destiny earlier in your life. If you're one of the 10 people, 1 out of 10 people, 10% born with the nodes direct, you get that sense of destiny later in life. The nodal axis transit spends approximately 18 months in each sign of the zodiac. Let's start with the south node. This is the soul's ego from the past. The accumulation of all the emotional residues from all our past lives. Represents security as it is already known. Represents karma on all 4 levels. It is the point of familiarity, both positive and negative. Positive, it is a fruition of prior efforts and it is our gifts. Negative, it is where we've got to redo or relive something, and we can call it the Achilles heel. It can also be a point of stagnation. Again, it's security. It's what we know. It gives us comfort. It is the prior mode of operation on emotional levels that allowed the prior karmic or natal Pluto to be actualized. And when you look at that South Node archetype in a chart, you look at how many aspects the South Node is making to see what other areas or planets were active in the past with that karmic dynamic or natal Pluto. You look to the rulers of the South Node by sign and house, and you can even look at those rulers aspects to fill in even more detail of how the ego operated on emotional levels in the past. Excuse me, had to cough. North Node. This is the leading edge development of our soul's ego in this life. It represents our emotional growth and evolution forward. It will represent insecurity because it's unknown. We haven't been there yet. We haven't done it. It will represent Dharma responsibilities or the future. Again, how we are evolving. It will be a sense of destiny or magnetic pull forward. It is a point of movement versus South Node being stuck as a point of stagnation. It is the current life's mode of operation on emotional levels that allows the evolutionary intent to be actualized. And by evolutionary intent, in general terms, we mean the Pluto polarity point, the opposite of where natal Pluto is on the zodiacal wheel. There are exceptions to this. If you want to know about Pluto conjunct South Node or North Node, I refer you back to the webinars from 2014 when we addressed the planetary method of Pluto and the nodes. Then you can just do a keyword search when you're on our website of planetary method and find the segment classes in regards to that. And it's actually the planetary method variations, I think might be the actual title of the class if you want more information. Okay, hold on. Okay, there we go. Now, you can also look at the number of aspects that the North Node makes to determine other areas or planets that will be used in the current life to actualize that evolutionary intent going forward. You will also look at the planetary rulers of the North Node by sign, by house, and their aspects for more details of how your ego is evolving on emotional levels in this life. Now, the past and future are always in tension of the present moment. And nowhere do we see that represented more clearly than South Node, North Node, and the moon. And this is true natally. You can look to see where the natal South Node, North Node, natal moon are, by where they're located in the chart, sign house aspects. And this is true in any moment. Where are the nodes transiting right now today? What sign is the moon in right now today? I do happen to know that South Node is currently operating about 6 degrees Aquarius, and whatever time you use for a 4th of July chart, we have a South Node collectively in our country at about 6 degrees Aquarius. So the United States, the month of June, is going through a nodal axis return on emotional levels. Isn't it interesting how this issue of immigrants being separated from their children is so much in the news this month, and everybody is emotionally triggered one way or another, or have no degree of empathy whatsoever, not mentioning anybody's specific name, and just being completely Aquarian cold. Just I've been kind of pondering this with this nodal axis return, and how are we going to choose collectively to go forward as a group of people emotionally? What type of collective ego in this country are we going to have with this nodal axis return? Now, what's happening with the past and future always in tension of the present moment? The past is always trying to shape the future in the present moment. And typically, this means that we're going to project that past forward for security reasons. Example, how many times do you say, I am not going to date that type of person? And all of a sudden, you're dating them for 6 months and go, they're just like my ex. That's you projecting the past forward in all your relating patterns. Now, the retrograde mean motion of the nodes means that we've got a little help to leave the past behind and actually evolve and move forward. Excuse me, I'm going to suck on a cough drop, as I have a tendency to do when I rattle off for 2 hours. My throat's just feeling a little raw, so thank you. In determining aspects to the nodal axis, we start with the planet and we move the nodes clockwise from the planet, because remember, the nodes reverse through the zodiac. They reverse through the houses. Okay, now in this example here, we're looking at Uranus and the nodes. So we can start with Uranus and its relationship with the north node. We follow this outer green circle all the way around the chart, and the north node is a balsamic conjunction to Uranus. It will move over Uranus in a few minutes. If the north node was here, it'd be a new phase conjunction to Uranus. Looking at it from Uranus and the south node, again, you start with the planet. You go clockwise, reversing through the signs and houses, and the south node is a gibbous opposition to Uranus. It's approaching an exact opposition. If we had the south node over here at 15 degrees Sag, it'd be a full phase opposition to Uranus. All right, clear in regards to that? Let's look at when planets are square the nodes, creating those skip steps that we talk about. In this example, we're going to work with Pluto. So here we start with Pluto, but as we reverse through the zodiac or the houses following this red arrow, the north node is applying squares to Pluto. If the north node and south nodes are at 16 degrees and the blue line with Pluto over here at 16 Virgo, it'd be exact squares. If north node and south node were the green lines here at 12 degrees, they would be separating squares. So you do it just the opposite with the nodes, reversing the numbers as you reverse through the zodiac and the houses. Now, when a planet is square the nodes and it bounces back and forth and back and forth, you have to find a way out of these skipped steps bouncing back and forth. We call it the resolution node. You start with the planet, you reverse through the zodiac and the houses clockwise, and the first node you come to is what we call the resolution node. It is the node that last passed over the planet. That's the bottom line that has to be focused on to resolve the skip steps of that planetary function. So now, here it is again in bullet points, language. The planet will skip back and forth between the nodes, not integrating its lessons. We're going to look at Neptune and everything we looked at here earlier. In other words, that planetary archetype's development is arrested. The resolution node is how we're going to evolve through the skip steps. It is the node that last passed over the planet. Here again, start with the planet, go clockwise. All right. Now, if the resolution node is the south node, that planetary archetype must be resolved through consistent application via the south node. It means we've got to go back to the past and readdress old issues. They can just keep coming up. So we've got to go, again, we've got to go back to that egoic emotional security and go, where am I stuck? What do I have to address and resolve? And when we do that, then that north node can actually move forward. If the north node is the resolution node, that is where this planetary archetype must be consistently applied. This then means that the future becomes the bottom line. It's not about going back to the past. It's consistently moving forward and described by the north node, its sign, its house, its rulers and their locations, any aspects. And if we are working to consistently move this planetary archetype forward through the north node, then the south node will get metamorphosed from the past. Resolution node, south node, got to go back and address that planetary archetype via the past. Resolution node, north node, that planetary archetype must be consistently moved forward through the north node. So here's the cycle of phases and aspects. You can see this all moves counterclockwise because that's how the planets move, okay? So what I also included here is my updated version of how we determine aspects between the planets. One area where I've actually evolved from some of Jeffrey Green's original teachings is that I compare the sun to the outer planets. So with Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Sun becomes the starting point. These inner planets are compared to the Sun. With Jupiter, Saturn, Chiron, etc., I compare the Sun to those outer moving planets. Give you an example here again with the chart. Let's start with this inner circle. We're looking at Mercury to Pluto. We start with Pluto, this inner green circle. The planets move counterclockwise. We've got to go all the way around the circle to get to Mercury. Mercury is a balsamic conjunction to Pluto. Let's look at Pluto and Venus. We start with Pluto. You see this short little line to Venus. Venus is new phase Pluto. Now let's look at Sun with one of the outer planets, and let's start with Saturn. Or let's compare to Saturn. Because Saturn, I start with Saturn, and I go all the way around this outer green circle till I get to the Sun. And the Sun is balsamic phase Saturn. So Jeffrey would say that all planets are compared to the Sun, regardless. And as I've done forecasting writings and podcasts over 30 plus years, I've shifted into this perspective. You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to practice it. You can work it through however is best for you in evolutionary astrology. Okay, I think that's all my slides, and so I am ready for a chart example. Before I move into chart example, comments or questions in anything regards to the Neptune archetype or the nodal axis? Any comments or questions before we move into chart example?
You're clear.
All right. Thank you, Leroy. And so I did not get any volunteers for Neptune square the nodes. And what's so interesting is I have, I was thinking on it, the last few days as I've been prepping, and right off the bat, I can think of 3 girlfriends who have Neptune square the nodes. I have a nephew with Neptune square the nodes, and I have a stepson with Neptune square the nodes. So I've had a lot of experience observing and correlating Neptune square the nodes. And out of those 5 people that I just mentioned, 4 out of the 5 I can specifically relate to having a lot of Neptunian confusion. So here is one of those charts. This is the chart of one of the girlfriends. And this chart example is my stepson's mother, his biological mother. So this is a female chart, May 20th, 1962, 3:03 p.m., Batesville, Mississippi. Her parents divorced when she was rather young, middle school. She was the oldest of 4 girls. Raised in the South as a Southern belle, her mother did remarry and divorced again. She has 1 son, which of course is our young adult son. Leroy's the father of this child. She had several intimate relationships. She was self-employed in alternative sales. If any of you are familiar with Nikan magnets, that was her work. She, definitely was in that metaphysical world. 3rd stage individuated, moving into 1st stage spirituated. She was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she actually crossed over in 2012. And I'm going to show you the bi-wheel of when she crossed over here in a little bit. And so we have 11-degree Libra rising here. She was in 11th house Pluto at 7.5 degrees Virgo. South node was 11 degrees Aquarius, and the South node is a balsamic conjunction to Saturn. As you can see right here, it was only 11 minutes apart. So this is a very tight conjunction. Some of you may be familiar with some of these 1962 mini charts when Saturn was balsamic, the South node in Aquarius. So you can see right off the bat, here's an 11th house Pluto, Aquarius Sol, and South node, ego of the past, Aquarius as well. Of course, this puts the North node over here at 11 degrees Leo in the 10th house. And here's Neptune. So if we look at Neptune as an example, Neptune is retrograde in the 1st house, Scorpio. Neptune is 11 degrees 39 minutes. If we start with Neptune and move clockwise through the chart, the North node is 1134. If the North node was 1139, it'd be exact. It's just 5 minutes past, not 5 degrees, 5 minutes. It is a separating square. So the North node is the resolution node here. And the North node is a 1st quarter square to Neptune. The South node, again, we go backwards with the nodes. 3/4 of the way around the chart, it's past exact. The South node is a last quarter square to Neptune. And of course, what do we have with Saturn? Saturn is a crescent phase square to Neptune. It's not quite 1st quarter square, but it's only minutes off, so that crises in action from the crescent side is there. Ruler of the South node by sign is Uranus over here in Leo in its own house. Ruler of the North node by house is the Moon over here in Sag, with a bright T-square to the Jupiter Chiron opposition to Pluto. You could even draw in the Mercury opposition over here. and see this grand cross in the chart. Ruler of the North Node by sign is Leo. Here's the sun over here at 29 degrees Taurus, last day of Taurus. And ruler by house is Saturn conjunct the South Node. So a lot going on in the chart. And Leroy, by all means, because I know you're familiar with Diana's chart as well. Anything, I invite you to jump in and speak as well. Let's just say generically, when Neptune square the nodes, there's going to be skip steps with that transcendence process. There's going to be skip steps in regard to cycles of confusion and clarity. There's going to be skip steps with that spiritualization process of merging with source. Now, there were time periods where both Leroy and I would observe Diana either going through confusion or depression, and even sometimes in the later time periods with her health issues. You know, at first there was a denial of the health issue. That can be another archetype of what we have with Neptune. When she was diagnosed with the cancer, you know, she didn't want us to tell Forrest. And here he was, you know, 12, you know, 13, 14, 15, 16. I can't remember how old he was when she was diagnosed. I think it was more along the lines of 13 or 14. And it was like, you can't say anything. You can't say anything. Don't tell him. Don't tell him. And it finally got to the point where we said, either you tell him or we will. I remember we had to raise an issue about that, so that, you know, Neptunian denial, confusion, fog, that kind of went on with, you know, the whole emotional crises, the crises of her physical reality when she got to the point that she couldn't take care of herself anymore. We had literally moved Forrest back to the South after living with us for 6 years. He was acting out. And if you look on it, back on it now, it could have been some of his teenage rebellion, but I think, you know, when things aren't dealt with consciously, they go unconscious. And that when you suppress something or distort something, it comes back out, you know, weird, distorted. And I think he kind of recognized something was happening. So he ended up being able to spend the last 4 months of his mother's life with her. And Leroy and I have looked at that as the grace of God Goddess, that we moved him back down there so he could be with his mom at the end. And I want to say that was the summer that he found out. When we had known for 2-3 years before that time period. So in this case, there was, you know, Neptune in the first house, a denial of self and a denial of the reality of what was happening with self. And the North Node in Leo, there were sometimes this, she would go back and forth between being almost like Leonian, superhuman. And, you know, we used to joke with this, you know, grand cross here in the mutable signs and, you know, the 9th third. She was a fantastic, you know, salesperson. She was one of those people who could sell ice to an Eskimo. And then afterwards, Neptune square the nodes, people would wonder, what happened? What did I just agree to? She would go through the highs of highs and the lows of lows. And this is something that I noticed with Neptune square the nodes. When they have those cycles of confusion, dissolving the separations. I mean, they can wander in that fog and just have the bottom fall out. And then when they go through those cycles of clarity, you know, sometimes it's just like, they can be over the top. And that was the case with these nodes here in, Leo Aquarius. The shock and the trauma that would create these emotional lows and sometimes emotional immaturity. And then the highs that would, you know, she'd manifest things, and it was just like, how did she do that? That Leonian North Node ego that would just really be able to charge forth and go. But what would happen here with this Neptune square the nodes is there wasn't a consistent process with it. It would tend to be one extreme or the other. As the case many times with 11th house Pluto's, she'd have some intuitive hits. And, Neptune square the nodes, they can be very psychic. Don't think because Neptune is square the nodes, these people can't channel or they don't have psychic abilities. One of my friends who is an older woman who's still with us, she was a nurse all her life, extremely psychic. And she had Neptune in the 12th house in Virgo, square the nodes. I'm not remembering the rest of the chart. But she had, and I don't remember whether it was north or south that was resolution node, but I just remember when Neptune was in the 12th house, and it was square the nodes. And very, very psychic. And when Jeffrey Green and Noel Till did their Astro 2000 conferences, 97, 99, 2000 in Denver. The first one in 97, that was Haley's comment. We watched it on the way driving back to Denver to Northern Plains. And there was a small group of us that drove down together. And of course, I made sure that everybody got to sign up and have readings with Jeffrey. And her and Jeffrey carried on this conversation about their lifetime as disciples of Jesus. Remember this? Oh, remember that? Oh, remember this? And on the way home, she was telling us, what they discussed and back and forth over things. And she, when she was a nurse, and they used to, we have gaming in Deadwood, and her and her husband lived an hour away, and he'd had like 5, 6 heart attacks. And they were in Deadwood one Mother's Day, and they were at different casinos, and she's sitting there at that casino, and all of a sudden she got the message to go to the hospital. She drove to the hospital, went to the emergency room and said, "I think you're looking for me. Did my husband have a heart attack?" And he had a massive heart attack and crossed over. And she could talk to him. She still talks to him. So point is, sometimes Neptune square the nodes, there will be extreme confusion in their relationship with Source. And sometimes they'll be extremely psychic and can just, see the other side, talk to the other side, but they may not always be grounded. And I have to say, I've noticed this with, again, 3 friends, a son, a nephew, all with Neptune square the nodes, various degrees of not being grounded. And so in this case, for this chart with this Neptune, okay, what there was a need here for her to resolve, because here's the other thing that'll happen with 11th house Pluto's. It's signatures of shock and trauma from past lives. And so sometimes in the 11th house Pluto, the slightest thing can trigger them and they freeze. Fixed air, okay? And they will just freeze. Or it is the sky is falling and the world is coming apart. And so when you look at the signature of an 11th house Pluto here with the South Node conjunct Saturn in Aquarius, and of course it's ruler of North Node by house Saturn. So here's relive or fruition or a mixture of both in regards to the structure of reality. And there were issues of being a Southern belle and not being real about the men in your life, and women not looking at harsh things, if any of you are from the South and know those lifestyles. So what would happen in regards to this resolution node of really being able to be completely responsible for herself, if traumas or little triggers would happen, she could just completely go off the deep end and check out and go into Neptunian denial, and I'm not looking at this and I'm not seeing this, versus a consistent application of being grounded and aware of what you can do and what you cannot do. As many in that alternative world, there was at the beginning, I'm going to heal this completely alternatively. And she ended up with chemo, radiation, surgery, and I think they were going to go back and do chemo. When they got her off all the drugs, they recognized she had broken her back with all the chemo and radiation that they gave her. And as they were trying to cleanse her out of the drugs, she had a cardiac event and transitioned. I don't have an exact time of when she left. And started hanging out at our fire pit in the backyard with all the grandmothers. But probably the most notable thing, look at the transiting node right here on this sun at late Taurus. And of course, there were other things going on as well. Neptune had moved in to, activate this, even though it was wide orbs. Mercury Uranus opposition. When she did transition, there, again, they had been trying to flush drugs, pain meds out of her body so she could try an experiential chemo. And so the best that I knew, that she crossed over consciously. She didn't immediately pass. Forrest was not there, and so they brought Forrest to the hospital, and he was able to have a goodbye with his mother. I'm sorry, before she crossed over. Sorry.
Hey, Kim.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm just noticing too. I've always kind of thought about all the contradictions in her chart. The more you look at a chart, the more you see the repeating themes, the more you see the inherent contradictions or amplification of wounds, is what I see with that Jupiter. Chiron balsamic phase conjunction in the fifth house, opposing her Pluto in Virgo. And to me, that was just an expansion of some of these intense psychic wounds that she came in with, where everything got magnified or
Mm-hmm.
it just didn't matter anymore. Depression.
Yeah.
And then amped up and animated and like you said, salesperson to the world. But then on the other side of that coin, there was just there could be just, it was like a limp doll. And so, I've always kind of pondered that. And of course, the ruler of that and then Uranus is kind of key in the chart. Uranus and Leo. You have again in the opposite sign. You have the Sun in Taurus in the 8th house, which is another contradiction. I just kind of, we've all, pondered these things as the deeper we look at a chart. When you have the experience of living with a soul for 10, 15 years, and that was part of my understanding.
And sometimes with strong Neptunian signatures in a chart, a 12th house Pluto or lots of Neptune aspects, it's possible that there can be lifetimes of the quote unquote monasteries and convents rather than being in the real world. And, Diana and I, we would work back and forth on each other in all kinds of metaphysical ways. Whatever one of us was studying, we'd practice on the other one. And if you look at this North Node here with the ruler Sun, 29.5 Taurus, 8th house, there was we uncovered lifetimes in which she didn't want to be in the world. And she just wanted to be, in the monastery, in the convent. We did work with a lifetime where she was in India and, just wanted to be in the ashram, didn't want to be in the messiness of the physical world.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be a Neptune square the nodes issue. And so this need for her with this resolution node, North Node, Leo 10th, to learn how to be in that physical world, regardless of any upsets or traumas, regardless of any emotional things going on, and claiming your life force, memories are coming up, and while she was a fantastic salesman, she wasn't always the best with budgeting. And there were some financial things that were catching up with her, as well as the health issues. And so there, in some ways, I think there was almost a letting go of life force.
There was at the end, yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I'll concur with that. It was almost like it's so overwhelming to consider digging out of this hole that I think I just might relent, Neptune. And of course, that's easy to do in a chart like this because you have Neptune in Scorpio retrograde, amplified that square to the nodes.
Well, and the Neptune and Scorpio generation, Jeffrey Green would always say that was the hardest sign for Neptune because it required you to turn that eagle eye Scorpio, turn that psychological detective Scorpio on yourself and really look at your own manipulations in the world, to look at your own wanting to be in charge or control. You're basically, he would use that word manipulation, and she had it in the first house, and retrograde. So this emphasized, okay, looking at where I'm not real with myself.
Mm-hmm.
And really, she would grab on to the latest spiritual thing and get all enthused about it. And then, of course, everybody else had to do it as well. And sometimes, that third stage individuated, even I would get to the point where I'd roll my eyes a bit and go, third stage individuated wants to do it in the head. And from third individuated to first spirituated, that shift in evolutionary states is going from center of gravity, ego, individuated, to center of gravity, soul, spirituated. And so it's going from Uranus, mental, to Neptune, emotional. Air sign, water sign. So it's going from spiritualizing through your head to really being able to do it on an emotional level, which is a simplification process as well. Neptune, Pisces, 12th house. And I watched her work through that. I watched her, struggle with that and the conversations we would have around it. Let me think for a moment. I'm, obviously this chart and the soul is very dear to me, so I'm a little triggered. So I'll try and be reach for a little objectivity. Aquarius, 11th house. But if anybody has questions or comments, type them into the board to Leroy or raise your hand and, we'll put you live on to connect with us. But I guess what I would just see in this example with Neptune is such extremes, again, between being more than life, first house, Neptune, and, just completely collapsing upon life, first house, Neptune. And, and then, again, that bouncing, back and forth where I think there could be some soul traumas here to such a degree, coupled with 11th house Pluto, Uranus, balsamic Pluto, and Uranus in its own sign. There were things that she just wouldn't want to look at when it came to father figures, when it came to, some, relationships with men. Neptune square the nodes in general can project your ideals out there onto a partner. Neptune and Scorpio generation can project those ideals out there on, to your partner. And, if we come from the wounding with the father figures, sooner or later she would have, from her perspective, the disappointments with the intimate relationship in her life. And, Leroy and I were, knew or talked or met, her last two, intimate relationships, one who stayed a friend and one who was in a relationship with her. They were living together, and as she was going through some of these hardest parts of her health issues and some of the denials, he couldn't handle it anymore and had to move out of their home. And so, that disappointment in intimacy that sources itself back to, the biological father, divorcing the mother with 4 girls. There was this extreme abandonment by the bio father.
Yeah, literally unannounced, pulling up a moving van to the front door with 3 girls and
4.
his 4 girls and his wife, and saying, "I'm grabbing my stuff and moving, and we're all done." And Diana, the oldest daughter, had to integrate that one. So tremendous disappointment in men. And, even though we all have our sexuality issues, Diana was very, she was Victorian. She had a great voice. She had a sexual nature to her, of course. However, I think there was a suppression of that energy in not only the conditioning factors this lifetime, but something else that wouldn't allow her to didn't necessarily let go. And so part of the issue with one of the males that she attracted that had to move out of the house was she actually drew in a, a pornography guy. She discovered, strange way,
Oh, I forgot about that one.
all of the websites, all of the sexuality that this gentleman couldn't feel like he could even touch upon or explore with this person, with Diana. And so this strange push pull, this juxtaposition of sexuality that we all know about in our current society.
That can be that Neptune in Scorpio extremes in general. And Neptune and Scorpio square the nodes. Of course, the nodes are going to be Aquarius, Leo, Leo, Aquarius somehow, some way. So yeah, that can draw that in there. I have forgotten about that one. Yeah, that was shocking to all of us because we knew this person and interacted with this person quite a bit ourselves.
Yeah, well,
so,
in my at this point, Forrest was still living in the household, so.
Comments or questions from anybody on anything that I might have missed or you want us to look at? And of course, Neptune rules, as Leroy was speaking earlier, that Jupiter Chiron in Pisces that was opposite Pluto. And I had forgotten, that we were, just dealing with Neptune having moved into 0 degrees, 1 degree Pisces. Anything else for you, Leroy?
No, thank you for doing the chart, though.
So this is one of my friends that I still continue to talk to. And so I said, okay, Diana, I'm just asking for permission to look at your chart today and share it. And so I miss you. And whenever I have any parenting issues with Forrest, I call on Mom. I go, okay, Mom, I need your help in the ethers, okay? Would you help Forrest recognize this? Because our son has Neptune square the nodes as well, and it's been he pretty activated by Uranus the last few years. And all right, if there are no questions or anything, thank you for allowing me to share. And we have one more class in this series. We do have a volunteer for class. Actually, I have several volunteers. I got to look and see. And one wide orb, and I'm probably going to choose a closer orb. And then I'll decide in the fall if I'm going to jump into planetary pairs or if there's some more basics that I think I need to cover. Because for those of you who don't know this, in January of 2014, I started over with segment 1. Well, Leroy was right there. We started over with segment 1 classes as webinars. And if you pay attention to that monthly email that comes out, there's a PDF attached to that email, and it's listing all of those classes, 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18. So all of the segment 1 classes that I have redone as webinars. And so we'll see if there's some basics, and if not, I'm going to start in at some point with planetary pairs, okay?
And use that PDF, if I could interrupt, Kim, because I want everybody, all the segment 1 associates, to know that I've reordered some things in the registered associates area of the site. So to make it more user friendly for the newer students coming on, I have the basic webinar series for Pluto by house and sign, the nodal axis series, 001 through 00033 are our foundational webinars for a new student, and only because some of the new people didn't know about the search function, etc. But get that list, get that PDF, and just know that there's that blue magnifying glass in the upper right hand corner of the page on your account page. Just search for anything that's subject specific, or use the title that's in the list if you want to get to a specific webinar fast without having to kind of scroll through. We're up to 370 hours now in the registered students area, so it's a challenging thing to organize and manage, trying to keep everybody happy, so to speak. So thanks for understanding that part of the story. If any questions, just contact me.
MediaMonk at evolutionaryastrology.net. Okay, here's our public webinars. Oh, June 27th. That says the 25th. I had to change that because of some of our family activities. This is Wednesday, June 27th, the day after Mercury goes retrograde. And then July 23rd for our next free Mercury retrograde in Leo. And just in case you don't know that I did a Chiron and Aries series, part 1, part 2. I think that sale is off. And of course, we also did a Uranus and Taurus series, part 1, part 2.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that's it. Thank you, everybody. We will see you next month to finish up this series with Pluto square the nodes.